Well, this hour of news and views is sponsored by Africa Muslims Agency, a beacon of hope to communities for over 35 years and in Africa and beyond. And we're going now, of course, to be joined by the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa, NUMSA spokesperson, Phakamile Hlubi-Majola. We're talking about the financialization of the energy sector. And we know load shedding, obviously, there's been huge relief. But are there going to be any surprises? Are we going to be seeing unseen costs? Are we going to see any other risks as a result of where we are? Phakamile, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Good morning, and good morning to your viewers, and thank you for having me on your show.
Yes, Phakamile, like I mentioned, load shedding, we've had a lot of relief in the last few months. But again, this energy sector is actually riddled with surprises. And this is a concern. This is the question that many of us are asking, that things are going so well for us. But is there anything playing out in the background? Because we've been hearing about unseen costs. We are talking about certain risks that are looming far, quite largely. And the last thing I think we need are surprises, Phakamile.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think at NUMSA we've been on record to say that load shedding was something that was deliberate, that it was manufactured, that it could have been entirely avoided. The mistake that our government made was to rush the energy transition by forcefully closing down coal-fired power units and power stations and doing so prematurely, and then replacing those with privately owned renewable energy power. It was basically the privatization of energy generation that ramped up the load shedding. Added to this, it was the premature closure of Komati Power Station, which government now admits was a complete disaster and an example of a failed just energy transition. Because the problem with the conversation that we've been having around this energy transition is that instead of us agreeing that we do need a base load in the form of coal, which will supply us with regular energy, and having an energy mix that incorporates renewable energy, what we've been doing is we've been listening to renewable energy lobbyists, who, by the way, are representing the interests of international private capital. And they are the ones who are saying, shut down coal, replace it with renewables. And that's just not scientific. And unfortunately, government was warned. NUMSA was among those that said, don't do this, it'll be a disaster. We were ignored. And we suffered like the worst load shedding in the history of Eskom's existence, because our government was busy listening to the demands of private capital instead of making decisions that actually will benefit society.
Yes, and also I think what is interesting now to see that we've got a very different government. We've got the government of national unity, and again, there have been questions that have been raised in terms of who the GNU actually represents, and so this is not going to be just a one-party decision in terms of where we are and where we're heading for as far as energy is concerned. And at the same time, we've been hearing rumblings with regard to NUMSA. We've been hearing rumblings with regard to huge increases that obviously have been proposed again for next year. The unseen costs, as we speak about renewable energy, all of that put together, there are some serious concerns, Phakamile.
Well, I'm interested in that phrase that you use when you talk about unseen costs, because it reminds me of the article that was written by Lungile Mashile in the Business Day, where he talks about attending, where he talks about information in relation to that, and Lungile Mashile, who talks about the financialization of the energy sector. and how basically renewable energy independent power producers are going to cost over $1 trillion. Now, if you remember, when we were a couple of years ago, there was a big debate around whether we should procure nuclear power. And it was under the time when former President Jacob Zuma was president. And there was a huge backlash from anti-nuclear lobbyists. And in fact, it happened again recently through the DA, where they rejected any plan for nuclear. And yet we keep talking about how we need to decarbonize. And it's proven that nuclear is the pathway to decarbonization, because you're not using coal, you're not burning coal. But instead of exploring that as an option, we're exploring the most expensive alternative, which does not provide us with regular energy, provides us with intermittent energy at a huge cost. It would mean overhauling the entire transmission network. It will mean massive displacement of jobs. We already saw what happened in Komati, where when they shut down that power station, even though they moved those workers that were directly employed by Komati to other plants, the entire value chain of companies that depended on Komati power station's existence, all of those companies shut down. Now you've got thousands of people who are hungry in Mpumalanga, people whose businesses were reliant on Komati operating. Those businesses have closed down. Government made no plan to cushion those families, cushion those businesses. There was no training. There was no alternative sectors that were built. That you did not. So you shut down a sector and you did not replace it with a new sector and new jobs. Even the renewable energy industries are not being built in the areas where the coal-fired power stations are. The majority of coal-fired power stations are in Mpumalanga. The majority of renewable energy companies are in the Northern Cape, but nowhere near where the power stations are. So the whole process is cockeyed, it's senseless. The only people who are making money are the banks and the investors. Meanwhile, we are plunged into crippling load shedding. Thousands of people are losing their jobs, massive suffering for the working class. But hey, as long as capital gets its payday, seemingly that's all we care about, and that's all our government cares about. And if you look at this GNU and the fact that this is literally a coalition of capital and right wingers, we can expect an intensification of those types of decisions, where you will have government taking decisions to benefit the wealthiest capitalists in our nation at the expense of the majority of people.
Yes, and also I think one needs to take into account, Phakamile, the export of A-grade coal. We know where all that coal is actually going to, and we know why that coal is actually leaving the country. Yet we have capitulated to the dictates, particularly from Western and European powers, as far as securing our own power generation goes as well. So that again adds another dynamic to this discussion that we are having.
Absolutely. I mean, so we have copied the model of this just energy transition. We're told that we were following Germany. But what the German government has not been as reckless as ours. They've not plunged their population into rolling blackouts in the name of advancing a just energy transition. The German government still relies very heavily on base load in the form of nuclear, in the form of gas, and in the form of coal. And a lot of South African coal is being exported, an average of 50 million tons of coal shipments, largely to Europe, is leaving our shores to the very same countries that are telling us that we must decarbonize. By the way, Africa as a continent contributes less than 4% of the globe's carbon emissions. But countries like Europe, the UK, Germany, China, America, these are the countries that are actually the greatest carbon emitters, but they're doing very little to decarbonize. But we are decarbonizing at extremely rapid rates at our own expense. We have, according to research, more than 400 years worth of coal that we could still mine, that we could still use to build our industries and to build our economies. And NUMSA is not saying that we should not decarbonize. We must decarbonize. NUMSA does believe that we must be very mindful of the impact of climate change. But we are not going to allow a situation where decarbonization happens at the expense of workers and their families. It's senseless to do that. You can't say that you're fighting climate change whilst at the same time deepening unemployment, poverty, and inequality. Komati, the failed transition at Komati should force us to learn lessons. Accept that if you are going to roll out a transition on this scale, then the first things you have to do is to retrain workers, to set up alternative industries before you shut down those existing value chains that are already contributing meaningfully to the economy, contributing in terms of jobs, etc. You've got to do it that way. You can't do it the way that we did before, where you shut down the sector and then afterwards you start thinking about creating jobs. I mean, it's completely our government made a really major mistake when it did that. So I think this article that Lungelo wrote really speaks to a lot of the issues that NUMSA has raised around this process, to say that if we want to, we first and foremost have to take care of our interests as a nation. We need to first and foremost secure our own developmental goals and make sure we don't undermine our own developmental agenda as we transition to a low carbon economy.
Well, Phakamile, we're going to have to leave it at that. Thank you very much for putting this into perspective. And hopefully we will touch base soon. But for now, please take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, National Union of Metalworkers spokesperson of South Africa, NUMSA. And with it, we're going to go for a quick break. We come back. We still got a lot more from now right until 10 a.m.